Okay, here we are for Part C of the review. The steam engine, Newcomen's steam engine to pump out water from coal mines was a really huge improvement. Watt's improved steam engine, he improved Newcomen's steam engine, could be placed on wagons and boats. It had a lot of uses. It was a boost to iron production and a boost to railroad building. Railroads, hard to build railroads without trains that use steam engines at that time. Liverpool-Manchester Railways built in 1830. In 1850, Britain had 6,000 miles of track. The effects of railroads: more industrial growth, new markets for a wider variety of food and industrial goods, reduced cost of shipping, and it also even promoted leisure travel, so people could get around and see things and go on vacations. Social effects of industrialization. The factory system. The putting out system goes away, also known as the cottage industry, the domestic system. Workers leave home to work in regimented factories with clocks telling them when they need to be there and when they get out of work and their short period of time when they get to eat lunch, things like that. The working class suffered. Early factories had lots of dangerous machines. Diseases spread in closed quarters. Women and young children worked as well in horrible conditions, and there was no health insurance, no job security. Urbanization was a big element in industrialization. Manchester was a city of 45,000 in 1760. In 90 years, it had a population of 300,000. The number of European cities with a population of over 100,000 in 1800 was 22. By 1850, it was 47. Workers lived in unplanned cities, crowded, unsanitary slums with their entire families living in one dark room. Middle-class prosperity, though. The bourgeois, the new prosperity, power, and leisure that they were afforded during this time period made them have even a bigger political voice than they had before. The haute bourgeois, basically the big dogs, bankers, merchants, industrialists. The petty bourgeois, the little bourgeois, shopkeepers, artisans, professionals, and clergy. And then the petty bourgeois, teachers. Economics. Classical economics, laissez-faire's invisible hand of supply and demand, was supposed to regulate the economy according to classical economic theory, as opposed to having governments do it. Big fans of the free market. Malthus was a theorist who believed that population growth meant famine and misery was inevitable, that the population would outgrow production, and so you'd always have poor people who were hungry and starving. Ricardo's iron law of wages, that the supply of workers determines wages, which determines population changes, which determines supply of workers, etc. These arguments basically justified middle-class acceptance of poor conditions for workers as inevitable. It's just going to happen, so that's just how it's going to be. Labor unrest. There was resistance to industrialization. Luddites were workers who smashed industrial machinery. Why did they do this? Because they saw their way of living being threatened. The destruction of machines was made a capital crime in Britain. So if you broke a factory machine, you could be killed. Luddites gradually stopped resisting. That way, resisting the changing economy, they started forming unions. Early unions had a big obstacle to face. Governments were not very friendly to unions. The Combination Acts of 1799 and 1800 were meant to prevent British unions. These acts were repealed in 1825, and the history of unions in the 1800s is a history of persecution, essentially, and eventual success, generally in the late 1800s. In America, for instance, occasionally union strike protesters were shot. Socialism, in general, believed that, this is basically all types of socialists, believed existing economic inequality was unjust, that community ownership instead of individual ownership of resources was proper, and that the profits of labor should be equally distributed. Utopian Socialists, these are the guys before Marx, names like Fourier, Blanc, and Owen, not Owen, but Owen, advocated social and economic planning, creating cooperative societies instead of competitive societies. They founded some communes, most of them were failures. Marxists, Marx and Engels, wrote the Communist Manifesto. They define history as the story of class struggle. And they use the dialectic, if you remember Hegel's dialectic, the idea of the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. In Marx, the bourgeois are the thesis, and the proletariat were the antithesis. And he argued that class struggle would lead to a dictatorship of the proletariat. The workers would take over, workers of the world unite, take over, and there would be a transition to the end of private ownership and a transition to a classless society. And Marx also argued that women were exploited by men and by capitalists. So there was kind of a feminist angle in here. Liberal ideas and unrest. Liberal reform in England. The Reform Bill of 1832. In England, for a long time, boroughs, that's what their voting districts were called, did not have equal numbers of people. So this bill created new boroughs to make representation more equal and increase the number of men eligible to vote. But still, that only meant that 1 out of 5 adult males could vote. Corn laws were repealed. Free trade industrialists in the Anti-Corn Law League pushed for this, but landowners resisted. When the Irish potato famine happened, it weakened pro-corn law, the pro-corn law position, and the Corn Law was repealed in 1846. Remember, corn in corn law is grains, not just maize. The Chartist movement wanted universal manhood suffrage, the secret ballot, equal electoral districts, and the end of property requirements for members of Parliament. None of this was adopted during the Chartist movement, but would be adopted decades later. The revolutions of 1830. Here we go again, some more revolutions. The French Revolution of 1830. Charles X opposed republicanism, liberalism, and constitutionalism. Very conservative guy. This caused rioting. His policies. The bourgeois, the middle class, installed Louis Philippe as the citizen king of a constitutional monarchy. The workers had wanted a republic, but the bourgeois got their way. And we'll be reading more about this in next semester about the rule of the citizen king. The Belgian Revolution. The French July Revolution sparked the Belgians into a revolution. Britain and France opposed intervention, even though, according to the Concert of Europe and the agreements they made at the Congress of Vienna and various other treaties, they were supposed to, support the United Netherlands, and Belgium became independent and neutral. Italian nationalism. Italian nationalists, known as the Carbonari, hoped to push out Austrians. They were inspired by these revolutions in France and Belgium, but Metternich's Austrian troops put their revolution down. This would leave Giuseppe Mazzini to be Italy's nationalist leader. We're going to read more about him in the next semester. Then we get to the revolutions of 1848. The causes of these revolutions in Europe. Conservatives did nothing about industrial and urban tensions and new problems. Remember, there are lots of things that are going on right now. These cities are big. They're not planned well. They're filthy. The workers have working under horrible conditions. So there are a lot of unhappy people, and that's going to lead to revolution. Radicals and liberals were convinced the Metternich system was done. It wasn't working anymore. They were looking at all these problems. They weren't getting solved. Italian and German nationalism. There was also nationalism among national minorities in Austria. So the Serbs were wanting independence. The Hungarians, the Magyars, were wanting independence. Hard times. This is a time period when there were a lot of crop failures, so food became expensive, and there were a lot of people who were jobless. In France, the Revolution of 1848, the bourgeois government of Louis Philippe refused to extend suffrage. The government collapsed. Riots and disorder between liberals, socialists, and Bonapartists would go on. The French voters will elect Louis Napoleon, president of the Second Republic. He's the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. So here you see France looking back again. France seems to constantly, pick between three options and can't decide which one they want to go with. Italy. Mazzini's Young Italy movement sought a liberal republic for Italy, and the Austrians put it down. And we'll be reading about that some more, because when we get into the chapters about unification of Germany and the unification of Italy, we're going to have to review this material again and go into more detail. Germany. 1834, the Zollverein was formed. It was a free trade union in Germany except for Austria. Riots in Berlin in 1848. Frederick William IV, as a response to these riots, issues reforms including a plan to draft a new constitution. Meanwhile, the Frankfurt Assembly drafts a proposed constitution for all of Germany, excluding Austria. Frederick William, though, dissolves the Prussian Assembly. Then he refuses the Frankfurt Assembly's offer to be a constitutional monarch of Germany because, as he put it, he refused to take a crown from the gutter. He believed that in basically divine right theory, or the notion that, you know, he didn't believe that the lower classes picked kings. Austria. Multinational empires cannot exist simultaneously with each nation having a nation-state, so that means the Austrian Empire is in trouble. Nationalist tension increased. Metternich is going to flee Austria. A constituent assembly ends the Rabat. Louis Kossuth, a Magyar, will lead Hungarian independence, but Austrians will be able to regain control. The revolutions of 1848 will fail, for the most part. Internal division, the lack of support in the countryside, and conservative strength will all help keep these revolutions from actually succeeding in any real significant way early on. English reforms meant that they avoided violent revolts. Repression in Russia prevented reform there. But these 1848 revolutions are kind of a signal about changes to come, and that's why we still study them.